Welcome to this explainer. Looking back through history, it's incredibly tempting to picture the founding generation as this perfectly unified team, all marching in lockstep toward liberty. But reality? Yeah, it's actually quite different. We really need to look at them not as a unified squad, but as a brand new group of people frantically trying to figure out their very first game plan. The stakes were astronomical, the pressure was immense, and honestly, they clashed hard. So today, we're going to explore the ideological foundations of America's first political parties and see how those intense early battles essentially shaped the DNA of the nation.
So let's kick things off with a simple question about human nature. Why do people form groups or choose sides in the first place? Think about your own life. We usually group up around shared values, shared goals, or sometimes shared fears. And America's early leaders formed political parties for the exact same reason we form groups today. They fiercely disagreed on the best path forward. Specifically, they couldn't agree on what exactly would keep their newly independent country safe from foreign threats while keeping it free from domestic tyranny.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at a new nation divided, Hamilton versus Jefferson, interpreting the Constitution, the national bank battle, choosing global friends, and finally, education, morality, and peace. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. A new nation divided.
So parties don't just magically appear out of thin air, right? They actually serve a really vital function, organizing ideas and getting voters onto the same page. But, and this is a big catch, every choice has a trade-off. While parties help citizens pick a side, those choices affect real lives and cause some major friction. Back then, these definitely were not abstract theories. Something like a tariff to protect a workshop up in the north could literally raise the cost of living for a farmer down in the south. The decisions happening in the capital had immediate, totally divisive impacts on everyday citizens.
Moving right along to Section 2, Hamilton versus Jefferson.
Now we get to meet the team captains. It is a classic tale of two completely different visions for America. On one side, you've got Alexander Hamilton leading the Federalists. Hamilton was this financial whiz who was all in on commerce, manufacturing, and a really strong federal government. He wanted a central authority robust enough to manage the national debt and build credit globally. On the flip side, Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic-Republicans. Jefferson was actually terrified of that kind of centralized power. He pictured a nation built on agriculture, prioritizing local control and much stronger state governments. Basically, it was a massive clash of identities. The bustling, industrializing North versus the agrarian, farming South.
Which brings us to Section 3, Interpreting the Constitution.
To understand how they played the game, you've got to look at how they read the rulebook. The Federalists believed in something called loose interpretation. Hamilton's team basically argued that you simply couldn't spell out every single rule a government might ever need. They leaned heavily on the Constitution's necessary and proper clause, arguing it gave the government implied powers to take action. To them, the Constitution was flexible, giving the government the tools required to actually ensure stability and growth.
But the Democratic-Republicans? Completely different approach. They were all about strict interpretation. Jefferson and his allies warned that reading between the lines was a very, very dangerous game. They figured that implied powers would inevitably just crack the door wide open to abuse and tyranny. Their rule of thumb was pretty simple. If the Constitution doesn't explicitly list a power, the federal government simply cannot do it. If it's not on the page, you don't have the power. Period.
Those differing rulebooks clashed big time in Section 4, the national bank battle.
This was the ultimate constitutional test of the era, and it came down to some massive trade-offs. The Federalists were absolutely convinced a national bank was crucial. They argued it would safely manage government funds and print reliable money, things a young, debt-ridden nation desperately needed just to survive. But the Democratic-Republicans fired right back. They pointed out, hey, a bank is absolutely nowhere to be found in the Constitution. Plus, they were seriously worried a central bank would just rig the whole economic system to favor wealthy, urban financiers right at the expense of everyday, rural farmers.
And the rivalry didn't stop at the water's edge. Let's hit Section 5, Choosing Global Friends.
International events literally poured gasoline on this domestic fire. The two parties totally split on foreign policy. Federalists, they wanted to buddy up with Britain. They were looking for steady trade and economic stability to fuel their commercial vision. But the Democratic-Republicans felt a deep connection with France. They totally sympathized with the French Revolution's fight against the monarchy and shared its republican ideals. So you had to pick, steady trade with the British crown or backing France's bloody war for liberty. As you can guess, it was explosive fuel for party arguments, drastically shaping diplomacy and public opinion.
Despite all these incredibly fierce arguments, the young nation had to find a way to survive. That brings us to our final section: education, morality, and peace.
So how did a fragile country survive its rocky beginnings? It really echoes this powerful principle from Romans 12:18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. They had to learn to strive for peace, even in the absolute thick of fiery political disagreement. Ultimately, they prioritized keeping the Union alive over just completely crushing their political rivals.
And you know, true peace isn't just something that happens out there in the halls of government. Romans 8:6-7 reminds us that peace actually happens in our own heads when we keep our minds spiritually focused. It's really about finding that internal equilibrium and staying morally grounded so you don't get completely swept away by all the anger and division of partisan politics.
This ties perfectly into the philosophy of the Heroes Mart Academy Godly Learner series. Education without biblical morality will eventually cause harm. Think about it. What is the actual point of being incredibly smart and highly educated if you just use that knowledge to make bad choices that hurt other people? True intelligence absolutely has to be paired with spiritual peace and a strong moral foundation to make sure we're building our society up rather than tearing it down.
I want to leave you with a little homework for this explainer, a provocative thought to chew on. Based on everything we've talked about today, the strict versus loose interpretations, the farmers versus the factories, which vision do you think better fit the 1790s, and why? Whose team would you have joined? Take some time to reflect on how those early choices are actually still echoing in the debates we have today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep pursuing knowledge with a grounded, peaceful mind.